Good morning. It's great to see you today. I want to wish all of my mothers in the crowd happy Mother's Day, and all those who may not consider yourself my mothers, happy Mother's Day as well. You know who you are. It's a joy and a blessing to be part of this family, to enjoy the closeness and the togetherness, and be comforted with the love that we share through Jesus Christ, and it's certainly a blessing to be here today. We've been going through a series. If you haven't been here with us, if you're visiting with us, we're glad that you're here. We want to catch you up to speed just a little bit. We've been going through a series about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And so we're on the third installment of that today. As we look into the pride of life, we're going to revisit Ephesians chapter 6 and just get a little bit of our bearings, kind of reorient ourselves for just a moment from where we've been. In Ephesians 6, chapter 10, verses 10 and 11, it says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." I don't use the word wiles very often. I don't imagine probably any of us use that word very often, but it means tactics or strategies, traps we might think of. And that's how the devil works. Ever since the beginning of time, Satan, being a liar, a manipulator, has tried to convince man to rebel against God. And he's strategic about the way he goes in trying to accomplish that. And so he will use the lust of our eyes. He'll use the lust of our flesh, or the desires of our heart, or our carnal desires, you might say. And he will also use pride. And I want to go back to verse 10 for just a moment. Notice something that Paul says. He says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might." What is pride? And we're going to talk about this more in detail in just a moment. But really, when you want to simplify pride, it is when somebody trusts in their own strength, in their own power, in their own might, in their own wisdom, in their own intellect. It's when we raise ourselves up. That's pride. And you know what? A lot of times the failures that we have in our walk as a child of God is because we forget that it is by God's strength and by God's power and by God's might that we thrive and succeed and live. But this is a strategy that Satan uses. Do you know why Satan knows this is an effective strategy? Because it's the same thing that caused him to fall out of God's grace. Satan was lifted up with pride and he was cast down. He knows it's an effective strategy. He's already lived it. 1 John chapter 2, this is where we get these three terms from. 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. John says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world, and the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever." So I want to highlight a word for you. And I want you to notice that there's a symmetry through all of these verses, and here it is. The world, the world, the world, the world, the world, the world, the world. We all live in the world, right? This is what he means by the world and the ways of the world, we might say. It's not about that the earth itself is evil or the cosmos is evil. It's not about that. But there are ways of the world that are wicked and evil. And notice what he says. Don't love it. Don't love the world. And he doesn't just stop there. He says also don't love the things that are in the world. And if you do love the world, the love of the Father is not in you. That's a strong statement. Because either we love God or we love the world. But he says you can't love both. Because if you love the world and you're devoted to the world and you commit to the world, you can't love and be committed and devoted to God. And then he describes the things that he's talking about, the things in the world. You know what he's not talking about? The people in the world. We're supposed to love people, all people. That's not what he's talking about. He's not saying don't love the people. What's he saying? Don't love the things that are the world. Why? Because the things that are in the world that you don't need to love are those things that would grab your attention and pull you away from God and towards rebellion and selfishness. And so those things are listed here. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. So what is the pride of life? I don't know. I think, typically we read words and they kind of, one word may stand out. And so you read through this, you go, oh, well, lust, pride, right? Obviously, pride is a part of this, but we're going to define pride and try to do that biblically, and then we're going to look at why does he say the pride of life? Because there's pride, but then there's something specific that he's talking about here, the pride of life, and we're going to talk about life as well. So let's just define pride, and we're going to look at Thayer's definitions. And if you're not familiar with this, the Bible was written in Greek and was translated to English, and so there are men who devoted their lives to creating what are called lexicons. And what they did was they defined those Greek words and what they meant at that time and what they meant biblically. Thayer's really tries to define how the Greek words were used in a biblical sense. So sometimes he takes a little license and he gets explanatory, but I think it's helpful sometimes to look at these things. So in its most generic sense, pride just means empty or braggart talk. Another word I don't use, braggart. But you know what that means. Someone who brags or every time they open their mouth, they're talking about themselves and how great they are, what they've done or what they've accomplished. But that's really not what 1 John 2 is about, just talking in a braggadocious way. But look at definition 2. An insolent and empty assurance which trusts in its own power and resources and shamefully despises and violates divine laws and human rights. Okay, that's a little more wordy, so let's try to break that down. When our confidence, insolent means arrogant, by the way, when our confidence becomes so overinflated that it grows and it grows, we become apathetic about doing the right things, that's divine law, and also about the concerns and cares and needs of other people. That's pride. Self-centered, self-focused, ego-centered or egocentric. That's pride. It's when I trust in me. That's what the word assurance means. Do you notice that he uses the word empty again? In the first definition, it's empty, braggart talk. Now, an insolent and empty assurance. Now look at definition 3. An impious and empty presumption which trusts in the stability of earthly things. So what is impious, or impious actually, impious? That just means irreverent. It means irreverent. It means we don't respect God. That's what it means. And that's what pride is. It's when we fail to see that God has placed us in order. He's put us in a proper place. And our place is not to try to elevate ourselves up to some great status or greatness, or elevate ourselves above other people, or try to elevate ourselves to the level of God. And once we decide, I'm going to do that, I'm going to seek my own greatness, and I'm going to trust in my own might, and we start trusting in the stability of earthly things, which we'll get into more detail about that later, what we will do is we will change. We'll change. So, pride, we've probably got a pretty decent idea about what pride is now. So what is pride of life? So let me ask you, what is life? That's a pretty broad question, right? What is life? Is this the pride of being alive or the pride of existing? Is that what it is? The word life is used over and over by Jesus. He may ask questions at times. He may talk about, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, what is your life? Isn't your life more than food and clothing? Well, he's not talking about being alive. He's saying your life, that is, if you could take the stream of time of your life from birth to death and you could define it and you could maybe say, okay, what does that life consist of? That's life. It's what I value. It's what I do. It's how I think and look at the world and how I view people. That's my life. It's who I am. That's what it is, who I am. So the pride of life. Now, you've got one life, right? You got one life. We say that all the time. You got one life. You can't live somebody else's life. And that's why you hear people often say, don't tell me how to live my life, right? Why? Because it's my life, right? And we do. We all have a life that God gives us. No one can control what you will or what you act. So what does this have to do with the pride of life? So your life as an individual is it's within yourself, and you have daily choices to make based on your individual responsibilities. That's your life, and that's why it's different. I'm not responsible for your family in the same way that I'm responsible for my family. It's my wife, my children. That's a part of the responsibility in my life that God's given me. What if I don't want to live that life? What if I don't want to do that? What if I just say, you know what, God, it's my life and I'll live it however I choose? And you hear this all the time. What is that predicated on? What is the foundation within our minds that causes us to think that this is okay? Well, let's establish some facts. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 19. Paul says, or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God? Now listen, and you are not your own, for you were bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit. Now listen, which are God's. So here's the truth. I can't tell you how to live your life, but God can. And you know why? Because He bought you. He owns you. We're bought with a price. We belong to God. His Spirit is within us. He said, therefore, glorify God in your body and your spirit. What is the purpose of God's children? To magnify and exalt our Father in heaven. You know what my purpose is not? To magnify and exalt and glorify Ian Jones. And when I make a decision that the course of my life is going to be about me elevating me, I'm living in the pride of life. That's the pride of life. How about this one? Well, it's my God-given right to pursue my own happiness. See, this is an extension of it's my life. And I have rights as an individual. Well, where did we learn that? Well, flip through your Bible sometime. It'll take you a while. Especially if you're searching for this, because you won't find it. Where did we get that idea? Well, Ian, the Declaration of Independence tells us this. We hold these truths to be self-evident. I mean, it's obvious that these are true, and it's evident of this. All men are created equal. That is true. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. See, you've got the right to pursue happiness. Do we though? Let me ask you a question. Who gets to determine what happiness looks like and whether or not it's okay for me to seek it? Because you know what? It makes some people happy to cause chaos. It makes some people happy to stir up drama. It makes some people happy to kill people. It makes some people happy to go to the bar and sleep around. It makes them happy. That's what they think. This is what makes me happy. I'm going to pursue that happiness, and you don't have any right to tell me that. Now here's the truth. God has told us how to be happy. In fact, Jesus explains it in the first several verses of the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about happiness. But you know what He doesn't say? He doesn't say, here's how to be happy. What He says is, the people that possess these characteristics and virtues and qualities within their heart and their mind, they are happy. See, God wants us to be happy, but He wants us to be happy in His holiness according to His will. And when I make a decision, I'm going to seek my own happiness. And even if that makes me gravitate away from God, well, it's my right to do that. That's because we are in the pride of life. We've exalted ourselves. This is what the Bible teaches. It is God who works in you both to will and to do for His good pleasure. The word will means what you determine. And what do? We determine something and then we act upon it. That's will and do. And the stream of our life, if you took from birth to death, the most fulfilled life that you could live is a life that wills and does for the pleasure of God. And you may say, well, what gives God the right to demand that of me? What makes Him worthy of my life? For in Him we live and move and exist. I'll tell you why God has the right to demand how we live our life. Because He gave it to us. He gave us life. We exist because God caused us to exist. And if He doesn't want us to live, we don't live. And if He doesn't want us to move, we don't move. If He doesn't want us to breathe, we don't breathe. And if He doesn't want us to exist, we don't. God gives us this as a gift. And He says, for His good pleasure. Notice Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. I know I use these verses all the time. They're just wonderful verses. Paul says, I beseech you, therefore, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. So he says, live your life as a sacrifice to God. Why would I want to do that? I'll tell you why. We live to the glory of God because He lived for the glory of us. That's why. We sacrifice for the glory of God because God sacrificed for the glory of us. See, we have no glory. We have none. But God gives us glory through Jesus Christ, and one day we're going to experience the fullness of that glory in heaven with Him when we are changed, and we don't deserve that. So you may be looking at God and saying, why would I give my life as a living sacrifice for your glory? I'll tell you why, because Jesus gave His life as a living sacrifice for yours. And He said, when you think about it, us doing that is not extreme, it's not radical, it's just reasonable. He gave us so much, why would we not reasonably give Him our life? And notice again, and do not be conformed to this world. You know what? That's easy. Really easy. You can make no effort at all, feel no stress in your life, and conform to the world. It's very easy. Because the world surrounds us, and that's what the word conform means, to be shaped by the outward pressures of something. If you do nothing, the world will shape you. It'll shape how you think. It'll shape how you act. It'll shape how you speak. How about this? For you young people, I guess this is kind of outdated now, isn't it? Man, this is real popular for a while. YOLO. It was kind of the new hold my beer. When somebody's going to do something stupid, they just scream YOLO and do something stupid. YOLO, you only live once. Live life to the fullest. You just, no sense in being careful. Just do it. I want to experience life. I want to experience the world. James says this, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? Now there's a good question. What is your life? He says it's even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. You know what? We've got some people in this room right now that are past 90 years old. Bill, how long is 90 years? About that big, he said. Time passes so quickly. You know what? A lot of people may live a long length of life and look back and say, you know what? It passed so quickly, it just passed me by and I didn't do what I wanted to do. I didn't do what I should have done. You know what? For some people, they don't ever live to be that long. Something suddenly happens and they're gone. They're gone like a vapor in the wind. And here's what he says, verse 15, instead of saying, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to experience this and I'm going to go here and I'm going to do that, instead what you should say is, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. See, it's not about don't make plans, don't make a business plan. That's not his point. He's not saying, hey, look, don't move somewhere and start a business and try to make money. That's not his point. He's saying it's arrogant. Notice, it's arrogant, but you boast in your arrogance, verse 16. It's arrogant to think that you are in control of your life. And so for us to look at life and say, well, you know what? I'm going to be responsible later. When I grow up, then I'll start making good choices. And, some people never grow up. But what is grow up? Well, maybe it's 25, maybe it's 30 years old, but I'm going to live life and I'm going to experience all the fun and have all the thrills that I can until I feel like I really need to. And that's a dangerous, dangerous game, and I'll tell you why. Because if the Lord doesn't live, or doesn't will, you won't live, and you'll have no life to live. And to boast as though we're in control of the time that we have on this earth is nothing more than arrogance. And he says, all such boasting is evil. That is the pride of life. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15, he says, look carefully then how you walk. What's he mean? Look carefully how you live your life, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. You know, this is a very powerful verse. He says, look carefully about the way you're walking. You know what? Some people just walk through life like Gomer Pyle without a clue. They just don't care. They don't really have a direction for their life. They just kind of go here and there. You know, I get up and I go work, and I don't know why I go work, but that's what you're supposed to do, so I'm just going to go do that. And they just live their life very carelessly, without a lot of thought about how am I living, how am I walking, how is how I'm living affecting the people that are in my sphere of influence? How is my life affecting my family? He says, look carefully. Pay attention to what you're doing, how you're walking. Don't be a fool. That's what unwise means. But be wise. Now listen to verse 16. Making the best use of the time. Who in here could honestly say that they make the best use of all their time? I can't. I can't. Can you? You know what he says? That's foolishness. You know why? Because the days are evil. You say, what does it mean the days are evil? I'll tell you what it means. It means this is a dangerous world that we live in. Some of you, after lunch, are going to strap yourself inside of a tin can with wheels on it and hurl yourself 75 miles an hour, hopefully, down the highway. And I'll tell you, life can change that quick. Something runs out in front of you. Somebody's driving towards you. Life can change that quickly. You know why? Because it's a dangerous world we live in. I nearly died of a heart attack at 40 years old, even though I weighed 195 pounds. Life can change quickly. You know what? This world is dangerous and things can change very quickly. And it's arrogant for me to think, well, look, I've got a surplus of time and I'll just do with it what I want to, and then maybe someday I'll do what's right. That is pride. So let's go back to the first time that Satan ever used his strategies. Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 and 6. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. So there's around 4,000 years between Adam and Eve and 1 John 2 that we read, right? You know what? Satan's strategies are exactly the same. Look what he used. Lust of the flesh, good for food. Pleasant to the eyes, lust of the eyes. And a tree desired to make one wise, pride of life. He hadn't changed. How did he convince her? You ever thought about that? Was she just that naive? How did he convince her? Listen to what he tells her. Let's go back to verse 5 for a moment. For God knows. What's the implication of that statement, for God knows? She said, God says we'll surely die. He says, you will not surely die, for God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you'll be like Him. Here's what he's telling her. God's trying to hold you back. And that's what He doesn't want to happen. You're not going to die. He just doesn't want you to eat that because He doesn't want you to ascend to greater heights. He doesn't want you to know what He knows and be wise like He's wise. He wants to hold you down. And we believe the same lie. That the commandments of God are grievous. That the things that God tells us to do are hindering us from being who we could be or experiencing the happiness that we could experience. When in reality, God tells us not to do those things because He knows the destruction and devastation that is attached to them. And He warned them, you eat the fruit, you'll die. But you know what happened? Once she believed the lie, her perspective about the tree changed. It was the pride that Satan tugged at that caused her to look at the tree differently. Because she'd seen the tree before. She knew what tree he was talking about. But now it looked good. It looked good. And it looked like it would be satisfying to partake of it. And see, that's the problem, is the pride of life is not something that is independent of the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes. Once you give yourself over to the pride of life, you're going to fulfill all manner of lust in your life. And that's exactly how Satan works. So make a good life for yourself. I say that some with tongue in cheek, some with all seriousness. You need to live a good life. What does that look like? What does it look like to live a good life? Does it look like this? I showed this to Toya. She said, that's bougie. And this can be yours for the price of $38,500 a month. This is a rental property. Oh, right? And it probably nothing like that, right? Just something modest, something a little bit bigger, a little bit better. What happens when you get something a little bit better, a little bit bigger? Well, you know, if we had something a little bit bigger and a little bit better. Is that what life is about? What about this? You say, hey, that'd be pretty nice. I don't know, John could tell you whether gold's up or down right now, I'm sure, but you know, that's not really the point. I want you to think about treasure for a moment. Treasure. Because Jesus spoke a lot about treasure. And when he spoke about treasure, this is really not what he meant. You know what he meant? He meant really the stuff that this can buy. The stuff that we hold on to and we value. And that probably is not some wooden chest with a bunch of gold in it. It's probably something more like our $80,000 trucks or our RVs or our travel trailers or our vacation homes or our guitars or our antiques, or, you know, the list goes on and on and on. You can love those things. And that's what John warns us against. Don't love the world and don't love the things in the world. Why? Why? Because they're not ours. For one, they're not really ours. See, God gives us life, and He gives us the ability to work and to obtain for the necessities of life and to provide for people that are in our life. But once you go on to you be seeking bigger and better, listen to what Jesus says. Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. He that dies with the most toys wins. Wrong. He that dies with the most toys is dead. And then who gets those things? Maybe his kids, maybe somebody else. But you know what? That's not what life is about. Life is not about how many toys you can have, how many four-wheelers you can have, how many motorcycles you can have. That's not what life is about. And I'll tell you, you can't fill that cup. How much is enough? Never. It's never enough. It won't make you happy. It'll be fun. And the point is not don't buy those things or don't own those things. The point is don't love those things. And if you love those things and your love for those things causes you to work more and more and more and possess more and more and more, and it pulls you away from God, and you make excuses about serving God because you've got all these things in your life that you're protecting, then it's a problem. Because then it's not just, I want more stuff. It's stuff is now our God. Proverbs 30:8 says this, remove falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food allotted to me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. You know, either extreme is bad. To have nothing leads one to desperation. To be without even food and clothing would cause a person to want to steal. You know why? Just survival instinct. But he says, you know, if I'm so poor that I steal, I'm going to profane the name of God. But I don't want to be too rich either, because you know what happens to rich people? They start to trust in themselves and their own power and their own might, and they forget about God. See, there's a danger there. Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. You know, the truth is, everybody that lives their life amassing a bunch of possessions on the day of judgment, if they are found to not be in God's fold, they will regret everything they ever owned, because they won't have any of it. It is futile, it is empty, it is pointless to amass possessions because we can't take them with us. And notice what he says, godliness with contentment is great gain. And you say, that's right, contentment is great gain. Nope, that's not what he said. There's a lot of people in this world that are content with what they've got. Sometimes it's because they are careless. They just don't care. They don't care if they have more. That's not great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain. It's both together, not one or the other, but godliness with contentment is great gain. So it's not just about being content with what you have, it's about being content and also living a life, exercising yourself toward living the godly life. That is great gain. It's a blessing. Notice what 1 Timothy 6 says, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to set their hope on uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Let's stop right there for a moment. Do you remember the definition that we looked at earlier, second definition of pride? I'll just read it again to you. An insolent and empty assurance whence trust in its own power and resources and shamefully despises and violates divine laws and human nature. That's what he's talking about right here. You know what he doesn't say? He doesn't say, everybody that's got riches, you tell them to get rid of them right now. Liquidate everything. No. He says, tell them not to be stingy. Tell them not to be prideful or conceited. And don't trust in your riches. But rather, verse 18, instruct them to do good and to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. You know what? God's kingdom needs people who are successful in their business, who are good at making money. You know why? Because there are people in God's kingdom that aren't good at that. And there are people who have expenses sometimes that they can't pay for, and the people that have the riches can help them. They can show the charity and the love of God. So don't think that I'm up here condemning being successful in business. Again, it's not about having those things, about those things having us. But the pursuit of those things for status, so people can look at me and go, man, look at how wealthy they are. Look at how great they're doing. Don't drink that poison. That's not what life is about. What about this one? You know, for some people, life is all about winning. It's all about winning. You know, when I remember, and Brandon's here, he coaches a lot more than I do, so he knows a lot more about this than me, but I remember just coaching little dribblers. Man, some kids were just sore losers. And I could never teach it out of them. They were just sore losers. Like, it didn't matter. We could have fought hard and lost by 1 point, and they're devastated by it, and they've got a bad attitude. But you know what the truth is? A lot of people are sore winners. They're sore winners. And I'm not talking about sports here, by the way. I'm talking about life. Keeping up with the Joneses, whoever those Joneses are. Keeping up with the Joneses. You know, the truth is, if nobody had a big, extravagant house, none of us would want a big, extravagant house because there wouldn't be an extravagant house to want. But it's that looking and that envying of what other people have that drives that. You ever thought about that? Competition and striving to be the winner is fueled by envy. Because I want the glory. When you can't turn that off in life and you're constantly competing with people, and the people in this room especially, you know what a sore winner looks like? It's the person that snubs the person who's not in the same social class as them. That's a sore winner. And that's prideful. And it's hateful. In fact, read James 2. God condemns it. He condemns that classism mindset. To look down on people, think we're better than people. You know, a lot of times people have troubles in their life. They got chaos in their life, and we look at it and go, well, if they were just as smart as me and good as me, they wouldn't have those problems. Really? How do you know that? Solomon was a winner. He wanted everything. He had all the resources, all the time to accomplish everything he ever wanted to accomplish. He got every trophy that he ever could have desired, and here's what he said: so I hated life. That's what's at the end. Win everything you can ever win, and then there's nothing else to pursue, and life is meaningless without God. And that's what he says. Under the sun, without God. Winning is not happiness. And if that's what drives you and motivates you in life, that's prideful. And lastly, authority and power. Authority and power. You know what? We are blessed to have authority. Whether you like the authorities now or not, we are blessed to have authority. We're blessed to have order in America. Local officials that keep the peace. We're blessed to have that. If you don't believe that, I'll try to book a trip and you can go with me to India and we'll see what that looks like to have utter chaos. Order is a good thing. Authority is a good thing. We need authority, but I'll tell you something. We don't need to seek to have authority and power. So we read this story this morning. I appreciate Lonnie reading this for us about King Nebuchadnezzar. And he is arguably, probably in the top 10 at least, of the greatest kings that ever lived on the earth. Just had an immaculate kingdom and was a very powerful king. But you know, Nebuchadnezzar had a problem. It says, then the king began speaking and was saying, is not this Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Whew. I did that. Look at what you've done, Nebuchadnezzar. He's like speaking to himself here. I guess, he's just having a soliloquy here. I did that. I built that. Look at what you've done. Aren't you great? It's my might, my power, my majesty. What happened? There were consequences to him lifting himself up. What were those consequences? Immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair grew out as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. Now, if you look at the text, it says that he did this for 7 times. I don't know what that exactly means. It's hard to pin that down, whether it's 7 years or 7 seasons. But that's not the point. But I will tell you this. He got the point. He got the point. He lifted himself up with pride, and God said, I'm going to bring you low until you remember who you are and why you have what you have and why you're in power and why you have the majesty and the might that you do. And God got the message across. Can you imagine one day being the king of the empire, the world empire, and then the next day you're out crawling around on your hands and knees, filthy and mad, just crazy, insane out of your mind, eating grass like a cow? How much lower could you get? It's easy, though, to see this. Nebuchadnezzar was a pagan after all. He obviously had talked with God and seen some things about God, but what about King David? When you look back in 1 Samuel chapter 16 and 17, you see this picture of David as this young boy who's humble, and he's just so self-sacrificing, and he's got enough courage, to just defeat an army, and he did. The shepherd David. And then you've got another man, King David. Same guy, but different eras of his life. Question. Brother John talked about David last week. If you were here, do you remember that? What he talked about with Bathsheba and Uriah and what happened? Do you think that shepherd David would have ever taken another man's wife? I don't. Number one, he didn't have the power to do what he did. Do you think he ever would have conspired to have her husband murdered after she got pregnant? There were a lot of things David did as king that he would have never done as a shepherd. You know why? Because power changes people. It does. It changes people. And I'll tell you, when you set your course and you're trying to get as high as you can, one of these days, God's going to bring you low. He's going to bring you low. You don't think this is effective? This is exactly how the devil tried to snare Jesus. Then the devil, taking Jesus up on a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. That's hard to even fathom, isn't it? He showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. How overwhelming would that be to our eyes? To see all the glories and riches of all the kingdoms in all the world. But Jesus did. He saw it. And the devil said to him, all this authority I will give you, and their glory, for this has been delivered to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you will worship before me, all will be yours. Now, there's been some people who've, had some conjecture about this. Well, Jesus already owned those things, but really on the earth he didn't. For our sakes, he became poor that we might be rich. Jesus, he wasn't a rich man. He wasn't a king on the earth. It was the lot that he lived in life to actually give up all those things. But Satan tempts him. He tempts him. You say, well, Satan couldn't have really given him those things. I mean, I know some people may think you need to make me a tinfoil hat, and that's fine. But have you ever noticed that when people get famous, that their life just becomes more increasingly depraved than when it started? You ever notice that? What is that? Now, they didn't go like Robert Johnson sings about, where they went to this crossroads and made a deal with the devil and signed a contract so they could play guitar. But I'll tell you, to succeed in this world and be part of that culture, you have to sign a deal with the devil, whether you know it or not. Because there's pressures in that culture to move you a certain way and to be like the world, to attract the world. And Jesus is not an idiot. He's not an idiot. He knows this. I'm not worshiping you. You shall worship God, and Him alone shall you serve. Jesus actually did the opposite. We're going to finish by thinking about Jesus. It says, who, as He already existed in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. What does that mean? It means even though Jesus was equal with God, when He came to the earth, He did not try to hold on to that glory which was rightfully His, but rather than hold on to that or grasp that glory, He emptied Himself. He emptied Himself. I wish we had time to talk about that more. Jesus took all of His glory and He emptied it and took on the form of a bondservant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, death on the cross. Therefore, God also has highly exalted Him and given Him the name which is above every name. You know what Satan offered Jesus? The fast track to glory. Get rich quick, essentially. All you got to do right now, do this. You have all the glory. What did Jesus choose? To suffer. To lower Himself. To obey the will of God. To deny Himself of His own glory. And not receive that until later. And because He humbled Himself, God glorified Him. He exalted Him. And it's the same thing for me and you. You want glory? You want to be exalted? Well, you can have that, but it's going to be a gift from God because we humble ourselves and live our lives in submission to Him. See, it's not always our actual status, but our perceived status that fuels our pride. You say, well, what do you mean? Just because a pawn thinks he's a king doesn't make him a king. Just because he wears a crown doesn't make him have the authority and power which he thinks he has. And that's the problem, is a lot of people, they really don't have status, but they believe they do. And that's just as bad as having actual status, because it will fuel our pride. We're going to finish with the words of Jesus this morning from Luke chapter 14. Jesus says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple." That is hard to read, isn't it? Why in the world would a God of love tell us to hate our family? He's not. So I just read it. It's not what he means. He's saying, when it comes to comparing your love for me and your love for your family, you should love me so much that your love for them looks like hate. That's how much I want you to love me. And if you don't love me that much, it's going to compromise you. Because sometimes families pressure us to make the wrong decisions, to do the wrong things, to believe the wrong things, to practice the wrong things. And in those moments, we will feel pressured to be loyal to our family rather than Jesus if we love our family more than we do Jesus. That's what he's talking about. You know what? There's been a lot of families split over Jesus Christ and the truth, and he said it would be that way. It's a cross that we bear. It's a cross we bear. Let me ask you a question as we're winding down. What does your life as a child of God feel like to you? Do you ever feel pressured because of your Christianity? Do you ever feel persecuted because of your Christianity? Do you ever feel the weight of your cross? You know what? There's a lot of people that said, all right, Jesus, I'm going to take up my cross, but let me take some pneumatic wheels and fashion them on there first so it'll be real easy to carry. You know, we saw a guy walking down the road one time with a cross. He had wheels on his cross. Jesus didn't. You know why? Because the point here is you're going to feel the weight of the cross that you carry. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be hard to carry. You're not going to like it. But you've got to carry it. Why? Because knowing Jesus and carrying a cross is better than having everything this world offers and not knowing Jesus. Because our life, one of these days, is coming to an end. And then none of it matters. Status doesn't matter, wealth doesn't matter, winning doesn't matter, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is whether or not God says, come or depart. That's all. Pride, if you live in pride, you're in for an involuntary humbling. That's the truth. And maybe it's pride that's kept you back from God. We don't know your hearts this morning. If you don't know Jesus Christ, if you've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ and your pride has kept you from doing that, we want to encourage you today. Humble yourself just like Jesus and God will lift you up. He will give you a status. What greater status can you have than son or daughter of God? That's a high status. If you're a child of God here today and you've been rebelling against God, maybe you've been living in pride, humble yourself, come to God, ask for His forgiveness, ask for His help. We will pray with you and for you. Come as we stand and we sing.